What's up? And welcome back to another exciting live stream with Gizmo Slip Tech. Today, I have a very special video for you. We are going to be optimizing the crap out of this Zephyrus G14. And we're going to do some undervolting on the GPU and basically CPU. Undervolting and overclocking at the same time, as well as just dedicated undervolting to help bring the temperatures in check for the Zephyrus G14, which this laptop is almost a perfect laptop. The primary issues with it that I had was just that the temperatures, especially when in max fan mode, were pretty insane. Basically max throttling, max performance, very high performance, but also reaching that thermal throttle threshold almost all the time nonstop, which is not ideal. And I believe we can get very close to the same levels of performance at quieter fan noises and more optimal wattages, and that's through undervolting and overclocking in MSI Afterburner, as well as in the Universal UxTU, which is basically the AMD curve optimizer tool, which undervolts and overclocks your CPU at the same time. We have 5 objectives for today's video. We're gonna overclock and undervolt the NVIDIA GPU using Afterburner with the curve editor. I'm going to walk you through the different steps and hotkeys you'll need in order to use that. Overclock and undervolt the Ryzen 9 7940HS with Universal UxTU, and you do need to use a specific version because the latest versions, the latest like 5 versions, were not compatible with the Zephyrus G14. So we're going to walk you through which version to get for the UxTU. And then we're going to do an optimization run for the best possible performance. So max performance with maximum fan noises. This is the kind of scenario, if you're using headphones, you're going to get the best possible gaming experience with this setup. And then we're going to do an optimization for best possible temperatures with max fans, but with just close to the maximum performance, right? So not quite reaching the peak levels of performance that it could theoretically go to, but it's like 80, 90% of the way there, but the temperatures are just hopefully going to be super awesome. And then the last one is going to be a balance of good temps, not quite as good as max fan mode, but the fans will be quiet and they'll still be good temps, and we're going to get enough performance hopefully for great 1080p or 14 QHD gaming. Now I got to give a huge shout out and thank you to Best Buy for sponsoring this episode. This is the Lenovo YogaBook 9i. This features dual OLED displays. This is an Ultrabook, meaning it's got an Intel i7 processor, 10 cores on here with an Intel Xe graphics card. Not only do you have enough performance for the average user, you can also do some lightweight gaming on here or do cloud stream gaming if you're primarily going to be playing games when you're at home with a good internet connection. The way Lenovo and Microsoft work together to optimize Windows 11 for 5-finger, 8-finger, 3-finger taps, all of them having specific and unique functions that apply to this dual screen laptop. You've got this keyboard right here. This keyboard, you can plop it down right here. It turns the laptop into a traditional laptop with the touchpad here down in the bottom. So if you need to type and use this in your lap, you can do that. Now, since this hinge is reversible, it means that you can flip the laptop backwards just like this and set it up on a table or desk, or flip it all the way around, and now you're in tablet mode. So you can use this like a tablet. I think the biggest thing for this device is the productivity that having 2 dual screens allows you to have. You can use this thing in portrait mode. You can use this in landscape mode. Now, this laptop recently went for sale on Best Buy's website and comes with a stylus, keyboard, and mouse, great webcam on here, great speakers, as well as this magnetic stand that also doubles as the keyboard carrying case. Now, for $19.99, you get everything in that package. Obviously, this is a very expensive device, but there was a lot of engineering and a lot of extra work that went into this. And I feel like if you're someone who needs dual screens on the go, there is no other option that is better than this. And that's my true opinion. I am allowed to say whatever I want about the device. Obviously, the biggest downside of this device, in my opinion, is that it is not as much performance on the CPU or the GPU as a gaming laptop. So you're gonna have to work around that if you're a gamer to be able to still play all of the games that you want to play, either using cloud gaming services or playing those games on low settings and lower resolutions. But yeah, for many people, I think the Lenovo YogaBook 9i is going to be an awesome experience, and I definitely recommend at least checking it out with the link in the description down below. And then if we can ensure that we have stability, as well as completing these objectives of either getting either the best possible performance, best possible temps, or good enough performance and temps with quiet fans. So depending on the type of person you are, hopefully one of these optimization runs is going to be something that it can cater to you, or maybe even you can switch between these different modes of using the Zephyrus G14, depending on if you're using headphones, if you're using the ambient speakers, because the speakers on the G14 are pretty good, and it does help a lot if you can quiet the fans a bit if you're going to use just the straight speakers on the laptop itself. So those are the objectives for today. Let's get started. This is the 2023 gaming laptop ranked list. This has basically all of my top recommended gaming laptops here at the top. You've got Cinebench R23 and TimeSpy benchmarks here, as well as benchmark sources. If these are rounded numbers, they are estimated. If they are specific numbers, that means we pulled a benchmark number from a specific source. And you can click on the link here and find the sources for where you can find up benchmarks and reviews and stuff like that. And then, of course, if you click on any of these laptop expansion buttons, it gives a summary of the laptop as well as the basic specs and where you can buy it as well. So just know that this is a resource that's available for you if you're in the market for a gaming laptop. Link is in the description if you want to go check this out. I would highly recommend checking this out if you're in the market for a laptop, because there's so many crazy options out there, and this will help you narrow down to what is the best available deals right now, because they're right here at the top of the list. We today are going to be comparing some of our performance numbers from the G14 after we optimize it to the initial results that we got in this initial unboxing and first round of benchmark testing. So we can not only compare the temperatures, but also the performance numbers side by side that way. If you need to get MSI Afterburner, link in the description to the MSI official page where you can download it easily and quickly and get the latest version. Then there's also a link into the AMD APU tuning utility, which is the UxTU. So if you actually go to their GitHub, they've renamed the project to Universal Tuning Utility, or x86 Tuning Utility, so UxTU. And the version you have to download for the G14 is actually April 23. This is the first one that I used. I tried several of these to see if I could get them any of them to work. For some reason, all of these newer versions instantly crash on the Zephyrus G14. So hopefully a new version is going to come out that will work. But for now, I downloaded this version and installed it, and it works for the curve optimizer, pushing the clock speed on the Ryzen 9 to a little bit higher. It's not a huge amount of performance gain simply because we are being very thermally limited in the 14-inch laptop chassis. So the performance increases are going to be not as much as it would be if it was a thicker chassis where we had a lot of thermal headroom and the CPU could just kind of run, right? So, but yeah, it's still a performance gain. I was able to score higher in Cinebench R23, and hopefully we can demonstrate that for you today as well. The exciting thing for me to show you guys today is the undervolting the GPU, NVIDIA GPU. It's the first time I've ever done that with you guys, all right? So that's a big one for me. And this is something, a lot of these things are either using the Ryzen UxTU or the MSI Afterburner for RTX 3000 or 3000 or 4000 series GPUs. You're gonna be able to use the same tricks and tools that I'm gonna show you today to increase performance either on other Ryzen laptops or other NVIDIA RTX 4000 series laptops. So hopefully this is gonna be useful for you, but especially if you have a Zephyrus G14, this is gonna be super useful because it's gonna be very specific to exactly what you need or want out of the Zephyrus G14, all right? So let's say you download MSI Afterburner and Universal UxTU. In order to download the AMD Universal x86 tuning utility, I did have to approve the usage of the, like Windows was trying to block the file. So I just wanna make sure you know that you may need to like approve that to be able to run this. And then for the MSI Afterburner setup, you just download that, extract that, and then open that. And we are currently doing 4.6.5 beta 4 on this, which is the latest version from MSI. So you want to get the Universal UxTU installed. We're going to do Cinebench R23 first, and then the first thing you want to do once you get Universal UxTU is I just type in UNIV and into the start menu, and it pops right up as an app to launch. But the only area you really need to worry about is under Custom, and down here, AMD Curve Optimizer. This is the areas that you need to go. You need to click on the third one down here, AMD Curve Optimizer. And this is where you're gonna be able to optimize your all-core offset, basically. And what this is gonna do is run your CPU at a higher clock speed for the same voltage or wattage level, which is crucial if you're wanting to improve performance without, any kind of additional hardware upgrades. It's like a free performance upgrade. If you test it enough and ensure that it's stable, then there's almost no downside, in my opinion. As long as you're not doing it too aggressively, it should be very stable. If you do end up crashing at all, what you need to do is not push it as far and reduce your undervolt or overclock. In this scenario, to basically undervolt and overclock at the same time, what you do is you check mark this all core offset under the AMD Curve Optimizer. You just click this button to start bringing it back. And this is going to essentially try to run at the same voltage level that it was, but just at a slightly higher clock speed. Initially, I did a test at like -10, and then I did -15, and then I did, I think, -22, and I have not crashed yet at -22. So let's start off with just let's just do 0. I want to point out that our fan speed profile right now is going to go for max performance all over. We're optimizing for maximum fan speed, maximum performance in the chassis, regardless of temperature for right now. That's our initial optimization run. And then we're going to do the balances like I was showing here on the initial one. These are going to be our 5 objectives, but first we're going to do best possible performance at high temperatures, okay? We're using Armory crate, and we are setting everything to maximum on the power sliders here. We've got our short, basically our long and short power limits set to 80 watts all across the board. So it's going to run up to 80 watts as much as possible. We are set in GPU Ultimate mode, which prioritizes providing as much juice to the GPU. And this should disable the integrated Radeon 780M GPU attached to the Ryzen CPU. Now, in manual fan mode, there is also a fan profile curve here. We have this set to maximum fans, and on our last optimization run, we are going to reduce the fan curve here and try to optimize for better noise and performance at the same time. The default GPU section of the manual is set to 100% on the fan speed as well, with a default 50/100. This is the way we initially tested everything in the initial unboxing review. All right, so these are the settings that we had, and everything is set to highest possible dynamic boost, thermal target 87 degrees Celsius, with a 50 megahertz overclock on the core clock and 100 on the memory. This is currently what is active. All right, so I'm just gonna change this, make sure you guys see this. This is the active profile. We're set to 80 watts. For the all-core offset, we have nothing right now, so we're all stock. We should be all stock across. And I have set Cinebench R23 with process lasso. All right, so here we are, Cinebench R23. I want to point out our clock speeds right now, 4.75 gigahertz, okay? So this is the stock. Nothing's changed. This is the default max clock speed. Notice that we're pulling 79.4 watts. We've hit our thermal threshold, basically 94 degrees. It's 95 degrees right here, but yeah. And we're starting to thermal throttle down below 80, down to 73 watts of power. Notice our clock speed is also coming down a bit, 4.66 gigahertz. All right, so it's not necessarily the worst performance here. It's very good performance all around. We got 17,361 for our initial test. Okay, so this is basically everything stock, but max performance profiles for the fan profiles. All right, we're gonna go back into UxTU. We're gonna go to custom. We're gonna go to the AMD Curve Optimizer. We're gonna set this down to minus 22. That we're going to click the little apply button, apply current settings. As far as I know, this is applied. The other versions of UxTU would just crash at this point. You make sure you get the right version. I talked about that earlier. Okay, so this is the beta V2 version 0. Let's go ahead and try running this again. We should be seeing higher clock speed. There's 4.94 for our top clock speed. Before we reach thermal throttling, we're at 79 watts, 4.93 across all cores. So we ended up getting about a 200 megahertz boost overall by using the curve optimizer from UxTU, which is pretty sweet. It's not going to be a huge bump in terms of performance, but it should still be a noticeable one in Cinebench R23. Let's find out what we get. Shaboom, 17,856. So that's like a 500 point increase using UxTU. Now, obviously, it's not a massive one, but it's a free performance gain for the laptop. So why wouldn't you want to do it as long as stability is good? And so far, UxTU has not caused anything to crash with these settings, but maybe as we test today, we'll find some instability. We'll see. This is reset right now. There's no core clock overclock. This is overwritten what's in Armory crate right now. And know that if you switch back to manual mode, it's going to overwrite these settings. And so that's a little bit annoying. Basically, if you're wanting to apply an MSI Afterburner profile, once you have everything optimized, you can save it under these saves. I've got two different saves here. I've got more of an optimal save for better temperatures, and I've got a save that's designed for more performance with this one. So I've got a nice two set here, and I do have Afterburner set to launch with Windows. What that does is it launches automatically and enters into my #1 profile for overclocking, so I don't have to mess with anything when I start the laptop anymore. It automatically brings my curve optimized overclock or undervolt active to the GPU. But if you go into Armory Crate, you start switching your profiles around, right? You go in here, you change it to turbo mode, performance mode, silent mode, whatever. That means you're going to have to reset your Afterburner setting to whatever you're wanting it to be. So just know that that's going to be true for most gaming laptops. If you change the fan profiles, it's going to redo your overclock for your GPU, typically. Under monitoring, you can see we've got a bunch of things set to go into the on-screen display, the OSD. You can see which ones. Basically, we've got all of the RTX 4000 GPU information, as well as some CPU information. And then in addition, we also have some information from HW info. All right, so we are missing a little bit of information from HW info. From Afterburner, and some things are just never in Afterburner, like the voltage for the GPU. So if you want to be able to add the voltage for the RTX 4000 series GPU, you're going to need to come down here, all right, and find the NVIDIA GPU right here, okay? And you're going to need to right-click on GPU core voltage, and you're going to need to go to RTSS settings. And then you're going to have to click Show Value in On-Screen Display. This is going to put both the MSI Afterburner and HW Info stuff up on the display for us in 3D Mark Time Spy, or when we run 3D Mark Time Spy to validate our overclock. Your basic GPU overclock for most laptops right here is in Afterburner. You just slide this guy over. Boom, there's 133 overclock over on the core. You could probably add maybe like 200 to the memory to start with. You can also click in here and type the number in if you're looking for a specific number. But these numbers are most likely going to be stable, plus 125. The tricky part is, if you do this, let's just go ahead and show you this. You're not going to get a consistent overclock when you apply this. You're going to get like a ballpark overclock where it's going to generally be trying to do 125 plus above what the stock curve does. And you won't really understand this until we actually go through the curve editor and show you, but I want to get TimeSpy loaded up so I can show you what the curve editor means and how it works. Along the bottom, we have our voltage, okay? And these are in millivolts, so 1,000 here equals 1 volt. The RTX 4060 tries to be running its clocks usually around 1 volt when it's under full potential power. Now, one thing about the curve optimizer window is it does stay on top. All right, when you go click on other windows, it does stay on top. You can close that and reopen it at any time, though. You can just open it with Control F is the hotkey, or you can also click the curve editor button and it'll pop up for you. You can use other tools that are free for this. You can run the Heaven Benchmark in a loop. You can run like Heaven Benchmark and Cinebench R23 in a loop. There's a lot of different things that you can do for stress testing. I like TimeSpy in a loop simply because it's easy. It does a good amount of pressure to the CPU at the same time as the GPU. It's also very, I just think it's a very realistic test of a GPU heavy video game. So if you're primarily overclocking your GPU, TimeSpy is really great. It's not great for testing your stability on your CPU necessarily, but it's really good for testing. Maybe if you do your CPU test only, that could be a better test for the CPU, but the graphics test 2 here, we're going to click that to run that. Then we're going to enable window mode and we're just going to run it in the loop. This means we're going to constantly be recycling graphics test 2. So the reason we want to run this is it's going to be a good consistent background check for our voltage, wattage, temperatures, all of that across the board. This will also tell us if we start running into any instability, like 3D Mark will crash if we overclock too far. We are doing 46 FPS right now, 49 looking at the guns. We're coming up the midsection here. I want to point out our wattage is 110 watts, 105 watts, well, 149 watts, that's pretty sane. But notice our clock speed, it's right around 2,500, 2,500 pretty consistently for our clock speed. This is very important. This is the core thing. If our GPU is being utilized 100%, our clock speed will usually go up and down consistently with our wattage, okay? So our wattage is doing right around 105 to 115. It's also, notice our temperatures are starting to climb quite a lot. Right now, we do have the curve optimizer on. And so this is not a true stock setting, right? Because we have a curve optimizer on. Our CPU temperature is actually much better than it was. So if I were to go ahead and set our value back to 0, let's just go ahead and close UxTU. Let's reset our Armory crate back to make sure that it's active. Our default settings are active. This means that we have now, well, we should be overwritten here with our GPU clock. Look at our clock speed when we did that. We're actually doing right around 117 watts. This is one of the highest wattage 4060s I've ever seen. Around 2,500 megahertz on the core clock, 2460s, 2475, 2,500. So on 120, wow, this is some of the most consistent wattage we've seen from the RTX 4060, all right? From any RTX 4060, quite frankly. It's pretty awesome to see, actually. Now, notice our temperature is starting to get into the mid-80s. We saw 84 degrees a second ago. Heat is starting to saturate the system. We saw 85 degrees there. So let's let it keep going for another minute or two. 85 degrees, 84 degrees, all right? And if we pull up HW info, we can see that we have hit 86.6 degrees. And that means we are bouncing off the thermal throttle target, all right? It's supposed to never hit 87, okay? Basically, if it hits 87, it's going to start throttling down hard. Every time it bumps into 87, we'll see a drop in wattage. It'll go from like 120, 115 down to like 105, 108. There it was. We just dropped in wattage to like 108. And that will essentially keep the temperature below 87. If we wanted to reduce temperatures, we could do that right here in Armory Crate. We could just set the target temperature down to 75. All right, when we set the target temperature down to 75, Now notice that our clock speed is now 1900. It is hardcore thermal throttling. Right now, getting our temperature down 77 degrees, 75 degrees. But look at our clock speed. It's only at 1920, which is really poor clock speed. We lost over 600 megahertz to the clock speed compared to full performance mode, which is not good, right? That is noticeably much worse levels of performance, and you're going to score far worse in something like Time Spy benchmark, or realistic graphics numbers are also going to go down quite a lot. First of all, let's set our temperature target back up to 87 degrees. All right, and now we're going to go ahead and close Armory crate. We won't need to adjust this until we're wanting to adjust our fan profiles again. Notice our temperatures are coming back up to thermal throttle range. We're going to basically be thermal throttling nonstop. Notice our voltage right here is at 1. This little line right here, you see this? This is showing you, this little horizontal line is showing you the currently active voltage and clock speed target for the GPU. So right now it's doing 1.0. Now it's doing 0.99 for the voltage. And if I go ahead and highlight these in the curve editor, you can just click on them. So right now you can see that when it's at 1.0 voltage, it's going to hit 2520 as the target clock speed for that GPU. And what we want to do is tell the GPU to instead target a lower voltage as the running voltage. So let's say we wanted to do, I would say to start out with, you might want to drop 25 millivolts when you're starting to undervolt with your GPU. You might, if you're trying to do a quicker undervolt run, you might do 50 millivolts off of the traditional target wattage and voltage. Let's talk how you manipulate this thing, okay? There's a lot of people who just end up going in here and they click each individual node. You know, they're clicking on these nodes and they're finally clicked it, and then they click it down, and then they click it down, and they're trying to undervolt like this, and it takes them literally forever to change all these little nodes. There's actually hotkeys. Okay, so first of all, if you want to reset your curve, what you do is you just click this reset button here on the main window. This will reset our curve back to whatever the stock default VBIOS curve is. Now, if you click on any of these and you press Control, you can grab the entire curve line and move it up and down. If you want to undervolt and overclock at the same time, I recommend pulling this down initially, just a little bit. What you want to do is you want to find a target voltage, say 975 millivolts, and then you want to press the Control button. So I'm pressing left Control and the arrow key, and this will move our target clock speed for that voltage up by 10 with each key press. So right here we have it set to 2520 at 975 millivolts. All right, so now that we've set the target of where we want the GPU to go to, we're also going to press Control L. This is going to set the voltage target for the GPU. Now notice that nothing has changed so far. Nothing has been applied to the GPU. It is only applied after we click this little check button here on the main Afterburner window. Okay, so we're going to click the little check button. We have the voltage curve will adjust automatically. It'll set all of the voltage nodes after your target to be flat. So it's no longer going to target them. Now you'll see that we're actually bouncing around between these lower range of voltages. Let's go ahead and take a look at why we're not actually hitting our target voltage and clock speed. Basically, right now we're thermal throttling. I think that's why it's bouncing down. You'll see we're hitting 86 degrees Celsius nonstop on the GPU. Realistically, that's probably why it's going down. So basically, if you do still run into thermal throttling, it's still going to bounce the voltage down your curve and try to run at lower voltage, which if you run at lower voltage, it's going to also be running at lower wattage, and it's going to reduce your temperatures, at least in theory. The actual testing that I did that was successful, at least initially, was at 0.94 at, I believe I went all the way to 2600, but let's double check. We can set our curve. Let's just do number 2 here. 2490 at 0.935. So let's go ahead and apply that. Right now it's using 0.935 as our voltage. Right now we're still thermal throttling, so we're going to need to let it actually cool down a little bit. We could exit the benchmark and come back into it, but it's going to cool down eventually as well, because we are running at a lower voltage range, so it's going to eventually come down. But let me go ahead and try my more optimized one. That'll help reduce the temperatures more quickly. So if we go to my more optimal, you can see that the target range is 2250, and it's much lower at 0.82 for our voltage. So let's go and apply that. All right. And so now look at our actual clock speeds. So comparing this to the original undervolting, or basically reducing the thermal throttling of the GPU, when we're using Armory crate and we set it to 75 degrees for our temperature target, we got 1900 for our core clock on the laptop GPU, which is 300 and something lower than what we got right now, like 320 lower, I think, than now. We've been able to set 0.82 voltage to the GPU. We're running at 0.82. We're hitting 2250 for our core clock, and we're getting our temperatures to come down steadily. Right now it's 78, 79 degrees, which is really good. Now look at our wattage. We're at 80 watts of utilization. So this is not how you optimize necessarily for best performance, but this is how you optimize for maybe best temperature. Like if you want your wrist rest on the laptop to be cooler, you want your fan noise to be quieter and still have good temperatures. This is the type of undervolt you would want to do for that type of a scenario. The other thing we can do if we're wanting to optimize, we definitely would want to optimize CPU as well, because we do have a vapor chamber system and we don't really want our CPU pulling 40, 45 watts unless we're trying to optimize our CPU to do so. Let's go ahead and do our curve optimizer. Let's set this back down to minus 22 for the Zephyrus G14. Let's see if that can help us out a little bit. We're also going to want to potentially limit our wattage on the CPU as well, especially if we're trying to improve our overall temperatures and reduce our fan noise while still having good performance. One of the key things here right now is that we are hitting reasonable clock speed with a much lower wattage than we were before. So that essentially is going to translate into good all-around performance and good temperatures at the same time. If we were wanting to go for maximum performance, let's go back into the curve editor and try to create a curve that's designed for maximum performance. We'll go ahead and revert our curve back to stock. And now we're going to go to the 0.95. Let's do 0.95. And we're going to add, let's shoot for 2600. We're going to shoot for 2600 on our curve editor at basically 940 millivolts. We'll set that to lock and we'll try applying it. All right, so now we are hitting pretty consistently up there at the 2600. So going back here, looking at our time spy and our overlay, we're hitting 2595, basically 2600 most of the time. We're occasionally bumping into the thermal throttle because it was thermal throttling before I applied this, and it's going to take a little while for the temperature to come down, basically. This is something that's more maintainable to maintain our GPU clock speed at the higher end. Like these clock speeds are pretty much consistently much higher than what we were seeing before. If we want to, we could even target maybe a little bit higher than this, but we're probably going to run into instability soon because we are 275 plus 275 over the stock curve. That is very high overclock, and it may be unstable, right? It still may be stable though, because we're undervolting at the same time, which means that we're running it at a more efficient power, like basically more efficient clock speed per watt, which should allow us to hit a higher boost clock all around. Let's go ahead and just try applying this. I don't think it's gonna necessarily be able to consistently hit this just because we are thermal throttling. I think this is where a thermal cooling pad is gonna help. Notice that we're having to go all the way down to 0.9, 0.92 for our voltage level. So like the GPU is still having to drop down pretty often. Let's go ahead and try an actual benchmark out with these settings. Basically, we've got a voltage curve. We can go ahead and add like a memory overclock. Let's just do 300 for the memory overclock. And I'm just going to save this as our third option. Okay, so our target is basically 2625 for our overall core clock for the Zephyrus G14. And the goal of this current clock setup, this overclock, is for like trying to hit the max possible score in time spy. That's what we've got set up right now. We've got max CPU TDP, which is going to push our temperatures high on the CPU. We've got the UxTU enabled with a curve optimizer of -22. So we're overclocking and undervolting the CPU. And then we are also undervolting and overclocking the GPU all at the same time. So looking at our GPU clock, look at that. We're doing 2625 nonstop. Just perfect. Like this is such a higher core clock, and it's consistently higher right now. At least until if we run into any thermal throttling, it's going to be consistently higher than what we had before. And at the same time, look at our wattage pull. We're only doing 107 watts. When we ran this normally, we were doing more like 115, 120 watts most of the time. So we've reduced our total wattage level for the GPU between at least 5 to 10-ish on our watt level. And at the same time, we're hitting a higher clock speed, which is kind of the ultimate piece de resistance when you're trying to undervolt and overclock a laptop. I'm hoping we score higher on this than we did with the previous G14 test. I think we will, given our clock speed appears to be remaining perfectly stable at 2625. We were doing 115 to 120 watts through this area, and our clock speed before stock with a 50/100 base manual overclock that comes with the manual mode, we were doing like 2425 to 2500, right in that range. And now we're doing 2625 consistently. And notice that we still have not reached thermal throttle levels. We're doing 82, 83 degrees. We're still climbing up a little bit in temps, so I wouldn't be surprised if 0.94 volts is right on the edge of where you're going to thermal throttle with the Zephyrus G14 4060. Right now we're doing 115 watts, which is the highest we've seen so far, whereas before we were seeing like a little over 120 as the highest. Previously. Really good improvement to performance. I'm not sure what we're going to see here in Time Spy CPU test. We are seeing, of course, thermal throttle, max thermal throttle here on the CPU, 4.38 gigahertz on the core there, 10,942, which is one of the highest RTX 4060 tests I have ever ran. I think that's the highest one I have personally ran. So this is the stock with a 50/100 overclock. Yeah, so on the left side, this side over here is the default. Over here is our new test that we just ran. Notice that we scored higher for both the CPU and the GPU. So perfect. We managed to get 414 more points than we did before. And that's not even just stock. Like this is like if we were stock, it would probably be like 10,300 or maybe 10,400 or so. That's a pretty significant gain in performance for a laptop that was already pushing the thermal throttle limits with a previous test. We might be able to push 11K. Let's just go for it. Let's try 300 on the curve optimizer at 0.94. You know, we seem to be very stable on that last run, and we're only doing 30 more on the clock. So let's find out. You know, worst case scenario, it crashes. Wow, 2655 right now for our clock. That's a true big overclock, right? Like we were not seeing that level of overclock previously. Even when we hit plus 125, we were still only getting around 2500 with the Zephyrus G14. If you're just a straight normal MSI Afterburner overclock, we tried running it. It quickly overheated, and it was doing about 2510 for our clock speed when it was not thermal throttling. And then as soon as it started thermal throttling, it started dropping down to like 2400, 2300 every time it would thermal throttle. And right now we are hitting 2655 nonstop, which is a huge improvement overall. So I'm really excited to see what happens here. But I want to point out the GPU temperatures right now are better on the G14, the undervolted one. And the wattage pull is also much better at 101, 102. Huge difference overall. Oh, right as we got to the section, we had a time spy crash. We crashed on time spy right as it got to the section. Okay, so it is too high of an OC for at least time spy to finish. Let's try pulling it back 10 watts. Or sorry, 10 clock speed target. Another option we could do is we could move up one voltage target up to like 945 and try to do the same wattage. 2650, right? Let's try to do 2645. Apply that. Let me just make sure we're on the right camera screen here. We're on the 945 voltage, millivolts. When we apply this guy, it'll line everything up with that voltage level. Interesting. So it actually maxes it at 2625. So there must be a limit to how far we can push this. But I thought we were just doing that with, I don't know. Let's just go ahead and just do a reset. Let's try this again. 2655. We'll lock it. Okay, so it did it that time, but we actually want to put this to 2650, I think. So sometimes you're gonna have to reset this. You can see it's kind of a little wonky doing this curve editor. Now we're at 2640. All right, we're gonna lock it there. We're gonna apply it. 2520 on the stock, 2610. We're not hitting it consistently. The wattage is dropping a little bit, but notice that our wattage difference here in almost the exact same scenarios is about 10 watts less. Our temperatures so far really haven't changed much, but we've got looks like 1 to 2 more FPS on the undervolt plus overclock section. Notice we also do not have a memory overclock going right now. I don't think our actual score is going to go up at all. It might even go down a little bit because we were at 2625. So in a sense, it's almost like running at the lower voltage allowed us to go to that higher 2625, probably because it was more power efficient going through the GPU. There's the same scenario right there, 121 watts versus 112 watts going through the same GPU. That shows you that it really is reducing our wattage pull and hopefully our temperature at the same time. Okay, so that time we got 10,795. Our CPU score is still better at 11,119. Like I said, we weren't really seeing any better performance because it didn't, like the curve didn't seem like it would actually took. It's set to be 2640, but we were only doing 2610 in the test. And the node next to it is only set to 2580. So it's a little wonky there. All of that said, that's kind of how you would push your performance to the next level in a chassis like the G14. If you're wanting to get better temperatures, let's start transitioning to some better temperature testing at the same time that we're getting hopefully better all around performance, or at least similar, very close to the same level of performance through undervolting while we go into some games. All right, so one of the best games for testing this, a game that historically has brought the laptops to their knees, Dead Space. All right, so Dead Space. We're going to be running the same exact settings between these two tests. So that's 2560 by 1600, DLSS on quality with ultra graphics preset in Dead Space. We are not quite maximally optimized yet, especially for a game like Dead Space. And if you're wanting to just really optimize your temperatures right now, what we've got is a undervolted GPU with a full power CPU. Right now we've got an undervolted GPU versus a full power GPU. And notice the temperature difference right now between the GPU that I've got at 75 degrees versus the 84 degree temperature, 85 degrees, 82 now, 83. We've got basically about a 7 to 9 temperature drop between the CPU and GPU. Oh, sorry, between the GPU in both scenarios. We are no longer thermal throttling on the GPU here in this scenario. Our FPS is very similar, right? Like we are at 56 right now, actually. Like, look at that. We're at 56 versus 55. Let's go ahead and just do a quick test. All right, so we're doing a test here. We're walking now. You know, and if we do end up with like a couple FPS less, that's okay. You know, that's the kind of sacrifice I think a lot of people are willing to make if it means that their laptop runs at a great temperature. So right now we have a 10 degree drop in temperatures, 85 degrees to 77 degrees. That's 8 degrees. Now it's 10 degrees. Shaboom. Let's just wait for a second. And there we go. All right. So we ended up with 61 versus 64 for our averages, but that's with an undervolted GPU that is running 10 degrees cooler. Now, if we were to try to go for optimal temperatures on this, what we're going to want to go is go into our Armory crate here. We want to reduce power limit on the GPU, on the CPU down to 35 watts. So you can see that this is basically what I would recommend for gaming that's high performance gaming, at the same time, better temperature gaming. Okay, so the Ryzen chip right now has been running between 30 to 45, 50 watts in dead space, typically around the 45 to 50 watt range in dead space, which is pretty high. And we're going to basically tame down that wattage, and you'll see that it does affect performance, but not by very much. At least that's my goal here. It'll hopefully demonstrate that when we reduce the TDP on the CPU here, hopefully we can get better CPU temperatures while still maintaining very good performance all around. Okay, that's kind of my goal. So notice that our temperature dropped from 95 degrees all the way down to 84 almost instantly, very, very fast. Basically, power limited our CPU down. We have undervolted it with UxTU, with a curve optimizer. And at the same time, we have undervolted our GPU significantly. Now, we do need to also set, looks like our curve, because we changed the manual settings here in Armory Crate and saved them. So that overwrote our MSI Afterburner settings. So we need to go back in here and apply our number one curve just to make sure that we are hitting the right clock speed. Because we were only doing 2000, we were only doing 2000 before, right there on the GPU. So now we're doing 2250. Which is, 250 higher clock speed. And it's perfectly possible to do that with an undervolt and overclock. Looking at our temperatures, we've got 72 degrees on the GPU, 82 degrees on the CPU. So I'm expecting to have a few less FPS, between hopefully 5 to 10% at most of a drop in performance. The Ryzen chip was not able to push as high of wattage as what we were seeing before. All right, so we ended up getting 64 versus 60. And so we lost 4 FPS, but our GPU temperature went from like 85, 86 nonstop thermal throttling down to 72 degrees, 73 degrees, 74 degrees, where we not throttle at all. We lost about 6% performance, 12 to 13 degree drop in GPU temps. And our CPU is actually only a little bit lower. It's interesting. Our CPU temperature, our CPU wattage is still pulling about the same level of wattage, because in this scenario right here, we've got 90 something watts going through the GPU. So the CPU is actually it's being choked out. You're not able to pull a high enough wattage to really push the temperatures on the CPU package up higher. So that's what's going on there. But overall, we had about a 12 to 13 degree drop on the GPU and about a 3 drop degrees Celsius on the CPU at the same time. So running cooler in both scenarios. And this is the first Ryzen setup where I'm getting great temperatures on both the CPU and GPU all around. I'm almost always either slamming the GPU or slamming the CPU. One thing I should add is 300 megahertz memory overclock. If we were to try to get maximum performance, let's just see our performance difference. All right, so let's just go over here. Right now we're getting 74 FPS. Very good, very good. So right around 70, let's just call it 72, 73-ish. All right, we're gonna call it 72 for now. We're gonna go in here and we're just gonna switch. We're gonna switch over here. We've limited our CPU. Now we're gonna up our GPU performance to the next level. We're gonna go to curve number 2. This sets us to 0.935 with a 2500 megahertz overclock. So I guess, well, let's go to the higher tier one here. This is 0.94 with 2625. Now we're running at 2625 for our boost clock, 93 watts of power to the GPU. Our CPU is only pulling 35 watts. We currently are not thermal throttling. We're averaging now 80 FPS, which is, a nice 8 FPS bump. I'm not sure if we're going to thermal throttle here. We might not, actually. This is probably going to be right on the edge of thermal throttling, I think, around like the 84, 85 degree range, but we may never bump up to 86 in this scenario. But this is basically what I'm envisioning if you were to go for a max performance undervolt / overclock in a GPU bound game. In a CPU bound game, in say Warzone, what you're actually going to want to do is go into Armory Crate, and we can go and do this in Armory Crate and try to set this if we want. We just switch over to this profile with just by clicking our 1 for our strong undervolt, 2 for our medium, and 3 for our overclocked and undervolted at the same time. Now, if you select 1, apply that, and then you go into, if you go into Armory Crate and you change things, you're going to need to change other stuff. You're going to have to go back and reset your MSI. I'm going to go ahead and try to optimize for best noise. All right, we're going to do an optimization for best noise and decent temperatures. Hopefully we can achieve that here. I don't know if that we will actually be able to achieve that. So in this scenario, you probably want to take this all the way down to like 25 watts, probably for the long, maybe 30 for the medium, and 35 for the short-term power limit. And then you're going to want to start just lowering these. These are going to be set to as low as they can possibly be. I would actually set the last one to be max. And for this, you probably actually want to do more like setting this curve. I'd probably do something around the 40%. That's what you're going to want to set for your fan profiles. We're also going to want to set the fan profile for this guy. So I'll just go ahead and set these as low as we can initially here. This is probably the easier way to do this. So something around the 40% for around 75 degrees. Now that undoes our Afterburner overclock. So we're going to have to come back in here and press 1, apply. Did you hear the sound decrease? The fans are now super quiet on the G14. I can barely hear them. I actually hear my Blade 18 and the fan I have sitting outside of my door more. Now look at our temperatures and look at our performance. We're doing 2250 on our GPU clock, but we're only pulling 65 watts into the system, which is fantastic. Very low wattage, but very high levels of performance at the same time, which is like the ideal scenario. 25 watts to that CPU. We're still not really being CPU bound that much in this scenario. 71 FPS. So we've lost 1 FPS all around. 72 now. So 71. Well, we lost 1 FPS compared to our standard like high max performance. And look at our temps. 75 degrees on the GPU, 79 on the CPU, and we've got a quiet system. We've got a quiet system that is going to be great for using your speakers to play games. This is, so the main thing I would say about this scenario, when you're going to 25 watts to the CPU, you are going to be limiting your CPU performance in heavily CPU bound games, like in Call of Duty Warzone, something like that. I would definitely set it higher than 25 watts. Otherwise, you are going to see pretty big degradation in your total FPS. We could try to do an optimization run for Warzone as well, which is pretty interesting, but this is, I think, a really good example of minimal fan noise, great all-around performance still, good temperatures. So this is to me like the ideal balance. So I'm expecting the temperatures on the GPUs to potentially go up into the 80s. I'm expecting the CPU to not get too hot because we've limited it to only 25 watts. And I'm expecting our performance all around to be just a little bit lower than what we had before. Like before we were doing about 60, 61 FPS. Now I'm thinking we'll probably do around 59 to 60 FPS. 60, 28, which is better than 64, 23. Like our 1% low is actually really good. But yeah, this is a really great balance of performance and scalability inside of a game. So graphic settings, we're on ultra settings. All right, so now we're at 2560 by 1600. Ultra settings, DLSS on quality. Those are our standard settings for God of War. Right now, out the gate, we are doing such a similar level of performance. But look at our GPU temperature. Right now on this, we are thermal throttling at 86 degrees. So we are bouncing into that thermal throttle immediately inside of God of War. Inside of the tuned Undervolt with no overclock on the GPU CPU with minimal fans, right now we are doing 81 degrees on that GPU, which is so much better. Only 2250 for that GPU boost clock, which is not as high. So I'm expecting a little bit less performance. At the same time, look at our wattage level, 81 watts versus 113 watts. We'll have to see. We might actually be able to match performance or be very close. We'll have to find out. Let's go ahead and do this test. So keep in mind, again, we are on basically, fans are super quiet right now on the God of War, on this G14 in the current moment. And yet our temperatures are still better. Okay, so we ended up with 55-35, literally the exact same result. We are not thermal throttling right now on the GPU. We still have not bounced into above, into the 85, 86, 87 range. So 84 being the highest. We may thermal throttle though at this level, which may mean that we would need to reduce the voltage down to like 0.8 and maybe drop the clock another 50 or something if we want to keep our temps below thermal throttling permanently. Or we could also potentially have the fans ramp up a little bit higher when they get into the 85 right there. So right now 85. So we could go in and go to Armory crate here. For our GPU, right now it's set to 51% on the fans. We can have it go, say, to 60. Let's go 65% on the fans. And if it goes higher than that, we'll have it go up a little higher. And we will also need to go in and apply our Undervolt at the same time back in Afterburner. So the fans have kicked up a little bit louder now at this point, but our temperature on the GPU should stay a little bit cooler, which is kind of the target, right? Our goal is to keep it, I would try to keep it under, the ideal temperature would probably be under 80, keep it in the 70s. As long as it's not reaching all the way up to 87, then I'm okay in terms of performance, especially if I'm trying to reduce fan noise. If that's my focus, is reducing fan noise. Overall, I really feel like this is probably a great spot that we're in. But if you wanted to target this down a little bit better without increasing the fan noise anymore, you're going to need to go back into Afterburner. Let's go ahead and just do it. We're going to need to select a new starting point for our target voltage. Let's do 0.765 or I don't know. We can press tab, by the way. I didn't say this before, but you can press tab to move between the nodes instead of clicking on them. Let's try 750 millivolts, all right? And we're gonna wanna target probably, I'm guessing around 2000, about 300 megahertz overclock. We need to lock that voltage with Control L. Then we'll apply what kind of temperatures. We were doing 80 watts inside of God of War before. Now we're doing 2000 megahertz. Our temperatures will probably stay in check a bit better because we've basically dropped 10 watts off. We've dropped about 10 watts off of the total TDP going to the GPU, 81 degrees to the GPU. No thermal throttle. I don't think you're going to thermal throttle at all in this scenario. If we were to do the average, look at that. We are actually, believe it or not, we're still getting almost exactly the same level of performance that we were before. But we're actually getting a couple FPS more. Super interesting that this undervolting it and just reducing the voltage on the GPU is actually not hurting our score very much. We've reduced our fan noise tremendously and we've decreased our temperatures on the GPU so we're not thermal throttling nonstop. So this is a great example of a more optimized laptop that's going to be cooler on your hands when you play games. It's going to be quieter so you can hear audio from the video game. And at the same time, it'll probably last longer because when you're playing games now, it's going to be, lower temperatures, for your VRMs, less wattage, less heat going through the system, and the fans don't have to ramp up as high too, so your fans are going to last longer as well. I think it's a win-win-win. It's hard for me to see a downside here, aside from maybe getting slightly less performance in certain scenarios. But as we saw here, at least in God of War, it appears to be such a similar level of performance, even when undervolting and reducing our clock speed. Let's go to Afterburner. Let's do number 3, which is our most aggressive curve edit. And notice that when we're thermal throttling, it's dropping the wattage down quite heavily, down to 2300, 2200, 2400 range. So we're not even able to maintain a high level of wattage at the same time. If we check the past history, we can see that it wasn't able to maintain a super high clock. Well, it was doing better at maintaining 2500, at least when everything was maxed out. So it is maintaining a higher clock here, but the actual FPS that we were getting isn't any higher. I just want to mention that if you were to try to optimize this gaming laptop for a game like Warzone or other esports titles, you're going to want to go to the CPU and you're going to want to just set everything to max. I'm just going to go take all of these up to 80. You're going to want to focus you want to set this to 80. All right. And then you'd apply that. And then if you want to maximize your FPS, when it's CPU bound, you definitely want to go for your stronger undervolt. All right. You want the temperature to be low on the GPU and the CPU to be able to pull as much wattage as it can to power your CPU as much as possible for a game like Warzone. Games like Fortnite or Apex Legends, if you're running on really low settings, those are the types of settings you would want for optimization. Apex Legends can be pretty GPU bound depending on the scenario. So you may want to run it more of like a balanced curve if you're trying to optimize for Apex Legends, like number 2 here, which is like a middle ground targeting 2500 megahertz while at the same time being a bit lower wattage or voltage. So that way we don't run into thermal throttling, because that's going to be the best balance in a game where you're predominantly GPU bound, but you don't want to hit thermal throttling. In general, I would probably, if you were to just try to tune this so you don't do thermal throttling on max fans, I would probably run this around the point, like 940-ish millivolts, give or take 5 to 10 millivolts, and run it around 2500 if you're trying to get just good temperatures and good all-around performance. If you want the best possible performance, you could overclock this to where you go a little bit higher wattage, but also a bit higher, a little bit higher voltage and a little bit higher on the clock speed. Or you could just try to, if it's stable, if you've got a good silicon lottery on your RTX 4060, you might be able to take a lower wattage, like 925 millivolts, all the way up to like 2600 or something. And that's going to give you kind of like the best all-around performance like we had in Time Spy. But of course you want stability as well. So if you ever crash, you just got to tailor your overclock down quite a bit to where, back down at like 5-10% if you start crashing. If you crash again, down another 10%. Bring it back in line. And as long as you're hitting good performance in the games you want, and you're getting the right fan noise levels that you want, and you're getting the right, not thermal throttling all the time, then I think you're in a really great place. And I think the G14, clearly the G14 can do this whole it can play games really great with great temperatures. It's just not great out of the box when you're tuned with manual mode all the way set max fans to the gills. It's just not the ideal tuning setup out the box. So with this tuning guide, I hope it helps anyone out there that's trying to optimize their G14 for the best blend of temperatures, performance, and fan noise, or just for maximum performance while at the same time not thermal throttling, hopefully all the time. That's it for today's live stream. I hope you found it helpful and enjoyable. Entertaining, at least. This was certainly an interesting challenge to put together. To me, the big thing about doing this optimization is it actually makes the G14 a really compelling purchase once it's optimized. Without it being optimized, it was a pretty high temps, constantly thermal throttling. Makes it harder to recommend, but if you're willing to optimize it to get better temps with an undervolt on the GPU, power cap your CPU a little bit, it's a really great blend of performance in a super portable package. Peace. I'll see you guys in the next one. Brandon out. Thanks so much for tuning in.